Willow Ridge was the kind of school where success was inherited, not earned. A prestigious institution for the children of the elite, it was a place where last names mattered more than grades, where luxury cars lined the parking lot, and designer clothes were the unspoken dress code. In the midst of it all was Alyssa Carter, an anomaly, an outsider. She didn't belong to the world of privilege and wealth. Unlike her classmates, she hadn't grown up attending extravagant galas or vacationing in Europe. She was there on a scholarship, a fact that made her an easy target. From the moment she stepped through the towering iron gates of Willow Ridge, Alyssa felt the weight of their judgment. Whispers followed her through the hallways like shadows, sharp and cutting. Asterisk, she doesn't belong here. Asterisk, asterisk, did you see those shoes? Probably from a thrift store. Asterisk, the laughter stung, but she never let it show. Instead, she kept her head down, gripping her worn-out leather notebook, the only thing left from her father, the only piece of home she had left. Madison Harrington, the queen of Willow Ridge, made it her mission to remind Alyssa of her place. The taunts, the casual cruelty, the orchestrated humiliation, Alyssa endured it all in silence. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But every insult, every whisper, every condescending glance built up inside her, tightening around her chest like an invisible chain. Yet, despite it all, she held on. Not to their approval, not to some desperate hope of belonging, but to something deeper, something they couldn't take away from her. Music. Late at night, when the school was quiet and the weight of the day threatened to crush her, she would sit at the old piano in the abandoned music room, letting the melodies pour out of her like a confession. It was the only place where she could breathe, the only place where she felt like herself. Willow Ridge could strip her of her pride, push her to the margins, and label her an outsider, but they would never take away her music. And maybe, just maybe, one day, she would prove to them all that she was more than just a girl who didn't belong. The grand halls of Willow Ridge Academy gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, their golden light casting long shadows against polished marble floors. To an outsider, the school was a picture of prestige and perfection. But Alyssa Carter knew better. Beneath the surface of its pristine walls, there was a different kind of order, an unspoken hierarchy where power belonged to the privileged, and outsiders were nothing more than entertainment. Alyssa had learned this the hard way. At first, it was subtle. A sharp whisper as she passed by in the hallway, words just low enough to make her doubt she had heard them at all. Asterisk, did you see what she's wearing? Asterisk, asterisk, she doesn't belong here. Asterisk, then, it escalated. Her locker jammed mysteriously before class, forcing her to rush across the building to retrieve her books. Her homework vanished, only to be found later in the trash, smudged with ink and soda stains. A shove in the crowded hallway that sent her sprawling, laughter ringing in her ears before she could even get back up. At the center of it all was Madison Harrington. Madison didn't need to get her hands dirty. She ruled with carefully placed words, a perfectly timed smirk, a glance that sent her followers into action. She never raised her voice, she didn't need to. A single whisper from her lips was enough to turn the entire school against someone. And Alyssa had been her latest target. But Alyssa refused to break. Every day, she bit back the sharp words she wanted to throw, choosing instead to meet their taunts with cold silence. Every night, she poured her frustration into the keys of the old piano in the abandoned music room, letting the melodies carry the emotions she could never say out loud. The music became her refuge, her rebellion, notes clashing together like a storm, fierce and untamed. It was the only place where she felt powerful, where their words couldn't touch her. Then came the challenge. Alyssa, Madison called sweetly one afternoon, her voice dripping with mockery. The auditorium was empty except for her and her entourage, lounging lazily in the front row. Alyssa had come to practice, but now, she was trapped. Play something for us, scholarship girl. The taunt hung in the air, thick with amusement. The others chuckled, waiting for Alyssa to falter, to stammer out an excuse and flee. That was how these games always ended, with Madison victorious, her target humiliated. But this time, Alyssa did something different. She walked toward the grand piano at the center of the stage. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to let them see her hesitate. Sitting down, she let her fingers hover over the keys, taking a slow, steady breath. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She could feel their eyes on her, expectant, cruel. Then she played. The first notes were soft, hesitant. But as the melody grew, so did her confidence. The music swelled, filling the empty auditorium with something raw and untamed. It was not delicate, not a pretty little tune meant for their amusement, it was fierce, thunderous, full of defiance. It spoke of every moment she had endured, every cruel whisper, every shove, every stolen notebook in ruined test. It roared in ways she never could with words. The laughter stopped. The whispers died. For the first time, Alyssa saw something flicker in Madison's eyes, uncertainty. She could feel the weight of their silence, the shift in the air as they realized this wasn't the reaction they had expected. Madison opened her mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out. Alyssa didn't need her approval. She didn't need their acceptance. As the final note echoed through the room, she stood, lifting her chin ever so slightly. Without sparing them another glance, she walked off the stage. Her hands still trembled, her heart still pounded, but she had won something more important than their approval. She had won back herself. The grand auditorium of Willow Ridge Academy shimmered under the glow of the massive chandeliers, their golden light casting long shadows over the rows of elegantly dressed students, faculty, and parents. The air buzzed with anticipation, a mix of whispered gossip and hushed conversations. The annual talent showcase was not just an event, it was a spectacle, a chance for the elite to parade their talents like prized possessions, a night where names mattered more than skill. And then, there was Alyssa Carter. She wasn't like the others. No prestigious last name, no lineage of lawyers, CEOs, or socialites. A scholarship student, a mere outsider in a world where connections dictated worth. People didn't expect much from her, no, they barely acknowledged her existence at all. Madison Harrington, sitting front and center, tapped her manicured nails against her armrest, her lips curled in an amused smirk. She had orchestrated Alyssa's downfall from the moment she had stepped foot into Willow Ridge. The snide comments, the exclusion from social circles, the rumors spread with venomous precision, it had all been so easy. Alyssa was supposed to break under the pressure. She was supposed to realize that this wasn't her place. Yet, here she was, stepping onto the grand stage as if she belonged. Alyssa walked slowly, deliberately, towards the sleek grand piano at the center of the stage. The murmurs around the room grew louder. Some chuckled, others whispered. A few exchanged glances that said everything they were thinking, she won't last a minute. Taking a deep breath, Alyssa sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face was unreadable, locked in quiet concentration. The lights dimmed, leaving only a soft spotlight on her. The world around her faded, the cruel smirks, the expectant stares, even Madison's piercing gaze. Then, she played. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like a fragile whisper breaking the silence. The melody wove through the auditorium, delicate and melancholic, pulling at something deep within the listeners. Then, without warning, the music shifted, building, growing, surging forward like an unstoppable tide. Fury poured from her fingertips. The notes crashed like waves against jagged cliffs, raw and unrestrained. The song was not just a performance, it was a confession, a cry of defiance, a battle against every sneer, every insult, every moment of doubt she had endured. Her body moved with the music, her fingers striking the keys with a force that reverberated through the room. Madison sat frozen, her smirk erased. This was not the performance of a timid scholarship student seeking approval. This was something else entirely, something untamed, something undeniable. Alyssa wasn't asking to be accepted. She was demanding to be heard. The auditorium, once filled with murmurs and quiet mockery, now sat in stunned silence. Eyes that once dismissed her were now locked on her, unable to look away. Even the headmaster, a man known for his impassive demeanor, leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, the final chord rang out, powerful, reverberating through the room like the last note of a storm before the calm. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the lingering echo of something unforgettable. And then, applause. Not the polite claps given out of obligation. No, this was something deeper. A slow build that turned into an eruption of sound, a standing ovation that filled the vast auditorium. Alyssa exhaled, her shoulders rising and falling as she stood from the piano bench. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer force of everything she had poured into those keys. She lifted her chin and scanned the crowd, her gaze finally landing on Madison. Madison, for the first time, had nothing to say. Alyssa didn't need words. She had already spoken, louder than any insult, any rumor, any act of cruelty. She had turned their stage into her battlefield, and she had won. Not just this performance. She had shattered the illusion that she was less, that she was weak, that she didn't belong. And now, as she walked off the stage to the sound of cheers echoing behind her, she knew no one, not even Madison Harrington, could take that from her. The thunderous applause echoed through the grand auditorium, a deafening chorus of admiration and astonishment. Alyssa stood at the center of the stage, her chest rising and falling rapidly, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The stage lights burned down on her, illuminating every beat of sweat, every unspoken emotion trapped beneath her poised expression. She had done it. She had proven them all wrong. For years, she had been nothing more than an outsider, mocked, dismissed, whispered about in the corridors of Willow Ridge. She had endured every cruel remark, every condescending stare, and every attempt to make her feel small. But tonight, she had shattered all of it. Tonight, she was not just another faceless girl in the crowd. Tonight, she was someone. But then, something shifted. The applause, once all-encompassing, seemed to fade into the background. A single sound cut through the noise, a slow, deliberate clap. It was steady, rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock. It was not a cheer of admiration, nor was it filled with excitement. It was calculated. Intentional. Alyssa's pulse quickened. She turned her gaze toward the back of the room. There, in the shadows beyond the reach of the stage lights, stood a tall figure. He was dressed sharply, his dark suit impeccable, as though he had stepped out of a world far removed from this one. His posture was relaxed, yet there was something about him, something unnerving. He exuded an air of quiet power, the kind that demanded attention without a single word. A chill crept up Alyssa's spine. The man was watching her. And then, he spoke. "You play just like your mother." The words hit her like a physical blow. The breath in her lungs turned to ice. Her mother. Alyssa's world tilted, the stage beneath her feet suddenly feeling unsteady. No one here ever spoke of her mother. It was a name buried in secrecy, a ghost she had learned to live with. The woman who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a life filled with uncertainty. And yet, this stranger, this man, spoke of her as if he had known her. As if he knew Alyssa. The air in the auditorium grew thick, the audience still clapping, still cheering, oblivious to the turmoil unraveling within her. But Alyssa felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. From the side of the stage, Madison, her longtime rival, narrowed her eyes. There was something almost amused in the way she tilted her head, as if she, too, could sense that something monumental was unfolding before them. Alyssa swallowed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Who are you?" she asked, though deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. The man took a step forward, his features becoming clearer under the dim lighting. His eyes, cold, sharp, calculating, never wavered from hers. "I've been watching you for a long time, Alyssa," he said, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "After all, it's only right that I keep an eye on my own daughter." Alyssa's breath hitched. The words rang in her ears, deafening, drowning out every other sound in the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The clapping faltered, replaced by hushed whispers that spread like wildfire. Madison's smirk disappeared, her expression twisting into one of shock. But Alyssa could do nothing but stand there, frozen in place, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just been said. Daughter? No. That wasn't possible. That couldn't be possible. Her father was gone. He had never been in her life, never left a trace. Her mother had never spoken of him, had never given her even a sliver of an answer. She had spent years convincing herself that he didn't exist, that he had chosen not to exist. And yet, here he was. The realization settled over her like a heavy fog. This man, this stranger, had been watching her. He had known who she was all along. And now, he had finally chosen to step forward. Why? What did he want? Alyssa's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She willed herself to breathe, to focus, to not let the storm brewing inside her consume her. But as she met his gaze again, she knew this wasn't just about her. This was about the past. About the secrets her mother had kept. About the truth that had been buried for far too long. And now, standing here under the unforgiving stage lights, Alyssa realized that her life was no longer her own. Everything she thought she knew about herself had just changed. Forever. Alyssa's world tilted as the words rang in her ears, distorting reality itself. The stage lights, once warm and dazzling, now felt harsh, almost accusatory, as if exposing a truth she wasn't prepared to face. The hushed whispers from the audience grew louder, buzzing like an unsettling hum in the background. Every pair of eyes in Willow Ridge's auditorium was now locked onto her, waiting, expecting, anticipating her reaction. But how could she react when her entire existence had just been flipped upside down? "I am your father." The words felt like a blade, slicing through the fragile understanding Alyssa had about her life, her past, and her very identity. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps as she struggled to comprehend what she had just heard. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her, and she had to steady herself against the microphone stand. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Her mother had never spoken of him, never even whispered a clue about who her father was. For years, Alyssa had convinced herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need to know. And yet, now, with this man standing before her, eyes dark with certainty, she felt something cracking deep inside her. No, her voice was barely above a whisper, raw and trembling. "You're lying." The man, tall and composed, didn't flinch. His gaze held an eerie calmness, an unwavering certainty that sent a cold shiver down her spine. "I'm not," he said, his voice measured. "And you know it." Alyssa's fingers curled into fists. A burning sensation spread through her chest, a mix of anger, disbelief, and something dangerously close to grief. She had spent years building walls around herself, creating a life where she didn't need answers to the questions that had haunted her since childhood. Now, in a single moment, those walls were crumbling, and she wasn't sure if she could withstand the weight of what lay beyond them. From the edge of the stage, Madison, her longtime rival, stood with arms crossed, her usual smug expression replaced by something else. Was it curiosity? Pity? Or satisfaction at watching Alyssa unravel under the weight of the revelation? Alyssa forced herself to take a step forward, her breath shaky. "If you're telling the truth," she said, her voice sharper now, demanding, "then where have you been? Where were you when my mother disappeared? When I was left with nothing but questions and no one to answer them?" For the first time, the man hesitated. A flicker of something, guilt, regret, sorrow, passed through his expression, so quick Alyssa almost missed it. "There are things you don't understand yet," he said quietly. "Things your mother kept from you to protect you." "Protect me?" Alyssa let out a hollow laugh, though it was anything but humorous. "From what? From the truth? Because I think we're a little late for that." The weight in her chest grew heavier. If this man was truly her father, then that meant her entire life had been built on a lie. Had her mother been hiding from him? Or had she been hiding him from her? "I know you have questions," he said, his voice softer now. "And I promise, I'll answer them. But not here. Not like this." Alyssa looked past him at the sea of faces watching her, their expressions ranging from shock to intrigue. This wasn't just a moment between them, this was a spectacle, a scene unfolding in real time for the entire town to witness. Her throat tightened. He was right. This wasn't the place for the truth she had been denied for so long. But one thing was certain, she wasn't leaving without answers. Swallowing hard, she met his gaze, steadying herself. "Then start talking," she said, her voice laced with defiance. "Because I'm done living in the dark." Alyssa stood frozen at the end of the hallway, her heart beat loud in her ears. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of everything that had unraveled in the past 24 hours. Across from her, Madison leaned against the cool metal of the lockers, her arms folded, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. But her eyes, sharp, calculating, told a different story. There was no mockery in them, no triumph. Just curiosity. The hallway was unusually quiet, the usual chatter of students reduced to hushed whispers as they stole glances in Alyssa's direction. The events of last night had changed everything. No longer was she just another girl navigating the social minefield of Willow Ridge. She was something else now, something bigger, something more dangerous. And Madison knew it. "So," Madison finally said, her voice laced with amusement, "that was quite the performance last night." Alyssa's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, the leather biting into her palm. She fought to keep her face neutral, to push down the storm of emotions churning inside her. "I don't have time for this, Madison." Madison let out a soft chuckle, pushing off the lockers with lazy grace. "Oh, but you do," she said, stepping closer. "Because you and I both know that everything has changed. People are talking, Alyssa. They're wondering who you really are. What you really are." Alyssa clenched her jaw, forcing herself to hold Madison's gaze. The truth had been revealed in the most dramatic way possible, on stage, in front of the entire town. A secret buried for years had come spilling out, and now she was left standing in its wreckage. And Madison? Madison had always been her rival, her tormentor. The girl who had everything Alyssa never did: status, power, control. But now, there was something else in her expression. Something unsettling. "What do you want from me?" Alyssa asked, her voice low, wary. Madison tilted her head, studying her like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "I just think it's funny," she said, almost thoughtfully. "For years, you were just there. Always trying to prove yourself. Always fighting for a place that was never really yours." Her lips curved upward again. "But now? Now it turns out, you had more power than any of us this whole time. And you didn't even know it." Alyssa felt her stomach tighten. It was true. Her entire identity had been built on a lie. And yet, now that the truth was out, she wasn't sure if it made her stronger or more vulnerable. "You act like this changes everything," Alyssa said, her voice steadier than she felt. Madison's expression darkened, just for a fraction of a second, before she plastered on that familiar, confident smirk. "Oh, but it does," she murmured. "Because whether you like it or not, people aren't going to see you the same way anymore. They're either going to fear you, or they're going to want something from you." Alyssa swallowed hard. She had spent her whole life trying to belong, trying to fit into a world that had never truly accepted her. Now, for the first time, she wasn't just a background character in someone else's story. She was at the center of it. And Madison? For all her bravado, there was something new in her eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe even doubt. "Why are you telling me this?" Alyssa asked, her voice softer now, laced with something dangerously close to curiosity. Madison hesitated. Just for a moment. And in that hesitation, Alyssa saw something she hadn't expected: recognition. As if, in some twisted way, Madison understood what it was like to be put on a pedestal she never asked for. "Because," Madison finally said, her voice quieter, "you're not just a nobody anymore. And that means you're going to have to choose who you're going to be." She took a step back, her gaze lingering just a little longer than necessary. "And trust me, that choice? It's not as easy as you think." Alyssa exhaled slowly, the weight of Madison's words settling into her chest. She had always thought of Madison as her enemy. But now, she wasn't so sure. Because if there was one thing Madison knew better than anyone, it was what it meant to carry expectations you never asked for. And for the first time, Alyssa wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Alyssa stood at the front steps of Willow Ridge High, her fingers gripping the straps of her bag tightly. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the pavement, painting everything in gold and amber hues, but the warmth did little to ease the chill that ran down her spine. Today had been different. Today had been the turning point. For years, she had lived in the background, a mere observer of the drama and chaos that unfolded around her. She had learned how to make herself small, how to disappear into the crowd. It had been safer that way. But after everything that had happened, the revelations, the betrayals, the truth about her identity, there was no going back. The world saw her now. They knew who she was. She exhaled slowly, watching as her breath dissipated into the crisp autumn air. Whispers had followed her through the hallways that day, murmurs of speculation and fear. Some students looked at her with awe, others with hesitation, and a few with outright hostility. It was overwhelming, but strangely, it wasn't as terrifying as she once imagined it would be. In fact, for the first time in a long time, she felt free. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. She hesitated before pulling it out, already suspecting who it would be. Madison asterisk. So what now, Alyssa? Alyssa swallowed hard. She could almost hear Madison's voice in her head, cool, unreadable, yet laced with the slightest hint of curiosity. The two of them had been enemies once, then reluctant allies, and now? Now, their relationship was something else entirely. Something undefined. Madison had been one of the few who had challenged her, who had refused to let her hide in the shadows. And despite everything, Alyssa respected her for it. She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. What now? That was the question, wasn't it? The old Alyssa would have hesitated, overanalyzed, worried about the consequences of her next move. But the girl standing here now, the one who had faced the truth, who had fought for her place, she wasn't afraid anymore. She finally typed her reply. Alyssa asterisk asterisk. I don't know yet. But I think I'm ready to find out, asterisk. Hitting send felt like crossing an invisible threshold, stepping into a future that was hers to shape. She tucked her phone back into her pocket and lifted her gaze to the horizon. The streets of Willow Ridge stretched out before her, familiar yet different. For so long, this town had felt like a cage, its smallness suffocating, its walls pressing in on her from every side. But not anymore. A slow, determined smile spread across her lips as she took a step forward. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. This was the beginning of something new. Something hers.